The mahogany conference table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of Peterson and Associates as I sat across from my 3 adult children, watching their faces transform from expectant greed to absolute horror. In my weathered hands, I held the revised will that would change everything they thought they knew about their future. The crisp legal documents rustled slightly as my fingers trembled, not from age or fear, but from the righteous anger that had been building for 3 long years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 72 years old, I had lived through enough heartbreak to fill several lifetimes, but nothing had prepared me for the moment my own children would look me in the eye and declare their youngest sister dead to them. Nothing had prepared me for the choice I would have to make between loyalty to the children who shared my blood and loyalty to the child who needed me most. My name is Ruby Dell Martin, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you birth. The room felt suffocating as I looked at Marcus, my eldest at 45, his expensive suit perfectly pressed and his expression cold as winter stone. Beside him sat Victoria, 42, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently on the table while she checked her diamond-studded watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. And then there was Jonathan, my baby boy at 38. Though there was nothing baby-like about the calculating look in his eyes, as he waited for what he assumed would be his share of the Martin family fortune. None of them had spoken to their sister Lily in 3 years. Not one word. Not one phone call. Not one text message or birthday card or Christmas greeting. When Lily had come out as transgender at 28, transitioning from the son they thought they knew to the daughter she had always been inside, my 3 eldest children had made their position crystal clear. "She's already dead to us," Marcus had said, his voice flat and final. "We don't have a sister. We never had a sister. As far as we're concerned, that person doesn't exist anymore." Those words had cut through my heart like a rusty blade, but what followed had been even worse. The systematic erasure of Lily from family gatherings, the deliberate exclusion from holidays, the cold silence whenever I mentioned her name. My children had not just rejected their sister, they had attempted to force me to choose sides in a war one never wanted to fight. Well, today they would learn the consequences of that choice. Attorney James Peterson cleared his throat and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, clearly uncomfortable with the tension radiating from our family gathering. He had been our family lawyer for 20 years, handling everything from business contracts to divorce proceedings, but I could see in his weathered face that this particular meeting was testing even his professional composure. "Mrs. Martin has asked me to read her revised last will and testament," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "She made these changes 6 months ago, and she was very specific about her wishes being carried out exactly as written." 6 months ago. That had been right after Victoria's wedding, the elaborate celebration that had cost me nearly $50,000 and to which Lily had not been invited. I had watched my daughter celebrate one of the most important days of her life, while systematically excluding the sister who had once been her closest confidant. That night, lying alone in my empty house after the reception, I had made a decision that would reshape our family forever. Marcus leaned forward, his businessman instincts clearly sensing something amiss. "Mother, surely this is just a routine update. Maybe some adjustments for tax purposes or charity distributions." I met his gaze steadily, seeing in his face the same stubborn determination that had served him well in his corporate career, but had made him utterly inflexible when it came to accepting his sister's truth. "Oh, there have been some significant adjustments," I said quietly. "You might say I've made some changes regarding family recognition." The first shock came when Peterson read the opening paragraphs, explaining that the Martin family estate, valued at approximately $2.3 million, would not be divided equally among my 4 children, as had always been assumed. Victoria's perfectly composed expression flickered with the first hint of concern, while Jonathan's casual slouch straightened into rigid attention. But the real bombshell was yet to come. I, Ruby Dell Martin, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate, including the family home at 1247 Oakwood Drive, all investment accounts, the Martins' hardware business, and all personal property, to my beloved daughter Lily Rose Martin, who has shown me the true meaning of courage, authenticity, and unconditional love. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents overhead. Marcus's face had gone completely white, while Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jonathan actually laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound that echoed off the conference room walls. "This is a joke, right?" Jonathan said, looking between me and the attorney. "Some kind of twisted lesson you're trying to teach us?" "Because it's not funny, Mom. It's not funny at all." "I'm completely serious," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside me. "For 3 years you've told me that Lily is dead to you. Well, now you're all dead to me financially. Every single penny, every asset, every investment that your father and I built over 47 years of marriage will go to the only child who still treats me like family." Marcus shot to his feet, his face flushing red with anger. "You can't be serious about this, Mother. Lily is not your daughter anymore. That person destroyed our family with her selfish choices and perverted lifestyle. You're going to throw away our inheritance for some stranger in a dress?" The words hit me like physical blows, each one confirming that I had made the right decision. This was not about money or inheritance or even family loyalty. This was about basic human decency, about the capacity to love someone even when they challenge your preconceptions, about choosing compassion over prejudice. "Lily Rose Martin is more my daughter than any of you have been my children these past 3 years," I said, standing up to face Marcus directly. "She calls me every Sunday. She visits me every other weekend. She held my hand through your father's funeral while you 3 were too busy arguing about his business assets to notice I was falling apart. She's the one who brings me soup when I'm sick and flowers on Mother's Day and listens to my stories about your father without checking her phone every 30 seconds. Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "But Mom, we're your real children. We're your blood. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I had carried for 9 months and raised with infinite care, and felt a sadness deeper than any I had ever experienced. "Blood means nothing without love, Victoria. You proved that when you uninvited your own sister from your wedding. When you told your own children that their Aunt Lily was dead and they should never mention her again." The attorney continued reading, outlining the specific provisions that would ensure Lily inherited everything while my 3 eldest children received exactly what they had given their sister over the past 3 years. "Nothing." Peterson explained that I had also established a trust fund for Lily's future children should she decide to adopt or use other means to start a family. I had created a scholarship fund in her name at the local community college, supporting LGBTQ students who faced family rejection. And I had even arranged for a portion of the inheritance to go toward funding support groups for parents learning to accept transgender children. Every detail had been carefully planned to honor the daughter who had never stopped loving me, even when the rest of her family had turned their backs on her. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Marcus threatened legal action, claiming I was mentally incompetent and had been manipulated by Lily into changing my will. Victoria burst into tears, alternating between pleading with me to reconsider and hurling accusations about favoritism and unfairness. Jonathan just sat in stunned silence, his usually quick tongue finally rendered speechless by the magnitude of what he was losing. But I felt nothing except a profound sense of peace. For 3 years, I had watched my family tear itself apart over fear and ignorance. I had begged my children to show compassion, to try to understand what Lily was going through, to remember the loving person they had grown up with who just happened to be living authentically for the first time in her life. They had chosen hatred over love, prejudice over acceptance, cruelty over kindness. Now they would live with the consequences of those choices. As my 3 eldest children stormed out of the conference room, each promising to contest the will and fight me in court, I remained seated at that mahogany table, thinking about the phone call I would make to Lily that evening. She had no idea what I had done. In fact, she had specifically asked me not to punish her siblings for their treatment of her, begging me to maintain relationships with all my children even if they couldn't accept her. But Lily's capacity for forgiveness was greater than mine. She could turn the other cheek because she was young and strong and still believed that love would eventually triumph over hate. I was 72 years old, and I had learned that sometimes love requires taking a stand, even when that stand costs you everything. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by 47 years of memories. Photographs covered every surface, chronicling the life Harold and I had built together, and the 4 children we had raised with such hope and pride. There were pictures of Marcus's college graduation, Victoria's first dance recital, Jonathan's Little League championships, and dozens of images of the child I had known then as Lucas, but who had always been Lily in her heart. I picked up one particular photograph, taken at our last complete family Christmas 3 years ago.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
We were all gathered around the tree, Harold still healthy and strong, all 4 children home for the holidays. Lily looked uncomfortable in that picture, I realize now. She was wearing a traditional men's sweater and jeans, her hair cut short, her smile forced and tight around the edges. She was still pretending to be someone she wasn't, still hiding her true self to keep the family peace. 6 months after that picture was taken, she had found the courage to stop pretending. She had sat me down in this very living room and explained, with tears streaming down her face, that she was transgender. That she had always known she was meant to be a girl, but had been too afraid to say anything. That she was finally ready to live as her authentic self, even if it meant losing everything. I remembered my initial shock, my confusion, my worry about what this would mean for her future. But more than anything, I remembered the relief in her eyes when I told her that I loved her no matter what, that we would figure this out together, that nothing could ever change the fact that she was my child. Harold had struggled more with Lily's transition. He came from a generation where these things weren't discussed, where gender was considered fixed and unchangeable. But he had tried, in his gruff, old-fashioned way, to understand. He had read articles I printed out for him, asked awkward but genuine questions, and eventually learned to use Lily's chosen name and pronouns. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The other children had been a different story entirely. Marcus, who had always been the most conservative of my children, had reacted with immediate rejection. He was a successful executive at a Fortune 500 company, living in an upscale suburb with his wife and 2 teenage children. He saw Lily's transition as an embarrassment to the family name, a potential scandal that could damage his carefully constructed reputation. Victoria, who had always been closest to Lily when they were children, felt betrayed by what she saw as deception. She couldn't understand how the brother she thought she knew could actually be a sister, and she took Lily's transition as a personal affront to their shared childhood memories. Jonathan, the youngest of the 4, had simply followed his older siblings' lead. He had never been particularly close to Lily anyway, and it was easier to side with Marcus and Victoria than to stand up for someone he barely understood. Within 6 months of Lily's coming out, my family had fractured completely. Holiday gatherings became battlegrounds where Lily's name could not be mentioned without triggering arguments. Family photos were edited to remove any trace of her presence. Wedding invitations and birthday parties were planned around her exclusion. I had tried everything to heal the rift. I had organized family counseling sessions that only Lily and I attended. I had sent articles and books about transgender experiences to my other children, most of which were returned unopened. I had pleaded, reasoned, and even threatened to cut off financial support if they didn't at least try to accept their sister. Nothing had worked. If anything, my advocacy for Lily had only pushed them further away. They began to see me as an enabler, someone who was encouraging what they viewed as Lily's mental illness or attention-seeking behavior. The breaking point had come at Victoria's wedding. After months of planning and preparation, after spending thousands of dollars on flowers and food and music, after helping her choose the perfect dress and venue, Victoria had announced just 2 weeks before the ceremony that Lily would not be welcome at the reception. "We can't have that disruption at my wedding," Victoria had said, her voice cold and final. "I won't have my special day ruined by having to explain to people why my brother is wearing a dress and calling himself a woman." I had given Victoria an ultimatum then. Either Lily would be invited as a full family member, with her girlfriend Emma as her +1, or I would not attend the wedding at all. Victoria had called my bluff, choosing her prejudice over my presence. I had kept my word. I had stayed home on Victoria's wedding day, sitting alone in my house, while my daughter married the man she loved without her mother or her sister there to witness it. The newspaper announcement had listed me as attending, a fiction Victoria had maintained to avoid explaining my absence to her new in-laws. That night, staring at my empty house and thinking about the 2 daughters I had lost in different ways, I had made my decision. If my children wanted to treat Lily as dead to them, they could live with being dead to me financially. The phone rang, interrupting my memories. It was Lily, calling for our weekly check-in, her voice bright and cheerful as always, despite everything she had endured. "Hi, Mom. How was your day? Did you remember to take your blood pressure medication?" Even in the middle of her own struggles, Lily was taking care of me. She had moved to Portland after her transition, partly to start fresh in a more accepting environment, and partly to escape the constant tension with her siblings. She worked as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, lived in a modest apartment with her girlfriend Emma, and had built a chosen family of friends who loved and supported her unconditionally. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, settling back into my favorite chair. "How are things with you? How's Emma's job search going?" For the next hour, we talked about everything and nothing. Lily told me about a new project at work, a weekend hiking trip she was planning, a book she thought I might enjoy. I told her about my garden, my bridge club, the new cat that had been hanging around my back porch. Neither of us mentioned the will reading or my decision to disinherit her siblings. That conversation would come later, when the dust had settled and I could explain my reasoning without the raw emotion of the day clouding my words. But as I listened to Lily's voice, filled with the same warmth and humor that had brightened my days since she was a child, I knew I had made the right choice. This was my daughter, the child who had never stopped loving me even when love came at a tremendous personal cost. This was the person who deserved to inherit not just my money, but my values, my legacy, my belief that love should always triumph over fear. 3 days after the will reading, Marcus called to inform me that he was filing a lawsuit to contest the will. His voice was cold and businesslike, as if he were negotiating a corporate merger rather than discussing our family's destruction. "I've consulted with the best estate attorneys in the state," he said. "They believe we have strong grounds to argue undue influence and diminished capacity. No rational mother would leave everything to a mentally ill child while completely disinheriting her normal children." His words stung, but they also strengthened my resolve. This was exactly the kind of thinking that had led me to change my will in the first place. Marcus saw Lily as mentally ill, rather than courageously authentic. He saw my decision as irrational rather than a natural consequence of his own actions. "You're welcome to try, Marcus," I replied, but I was examined by 2 independent physicians before I changed my will. Dr. Richards and Dr. Thompson both certified that I was of sound mind and acting of my own free will. "Your lawsuit will only result in expensive legal fees and more publicity about why I made this decision." The threat of publicity gave him pause. Marcus had always been obsessed with his public image, and the last thing he wanted was a court case that would expose his treatment of his transgender sister to his colleagues and neighbors. But his pride was stronger than his pragmatism. "This isn't over, Mother. I won't let you destroy our family legacy for the sake of enabling a delusion." The irony was almost overwhelming. Marcus was accusing me of destroying our family legacy when he and his siblings had already done that themselves by rejecting their sister. They had torn apart our family bonds with their cruelty and intolerance, and now they were angry that I was refusing to reward them financially for that destruction. Victoria's approach was different, but equally painful. She came to my house the following Saturday, bringing her 2 young children and hoping their presence would soften my heart and change my mind about the inheritance. "Mom, you have to think about your grandchildren," she pleaded, watching her 5-year-old son play with the toys I kept in my living room for their visits. "Little Michael and Sarah deserve to have their college funds secured. How can you take money away from innocent children who had nothing to do with this situation?" It was emotional manipulation of the cruelest kind, using my love for my grandchildren to pressure me into supporting their parents' bigotry. But I had anticipated this argument and prepared my response carefully. "Victoria," I said gently, kneeling down to Michael's level as he showed me a drawing he had made, "your children will always be welcome in this house. I will always love them and support them emotionally. But their financial future is your responsibility, and their father's responsibility, not mine." I stood up and faced my daughter directly. "If you want your children to inherit family wealth, You need to start acting like family. That means accepting your sister and teaching these beautiful children that love is more important than prejudice." Victoria's face crumpled with frustration and grief. "She's not my sister anymore, Mom. I don't know how to make you understand that. The person we grew up with is gone. This Lily person is a stranger wearing his face." The depth of Victoria's denial was heartbreaking. She was so invested in her version of reality that she couldn't see past her own fear and confusion to recognize that Lily was more herself now than she had ever been before. The brother she mourned had never really existed. He had been a performance, a mask Lily wore to survive in a world that didn't accept her truth. After Victoria left with her children, I called my sister Margaret in Arizona. At 74, Margaret was my closest confidant, and the only person who truly understood the weight of the decision I had made. "I'm proud of you, Ruby," she said after I recounted the week's events. "What you're doing takes tremendous courage. Not many mothers would be willing to sacrifice their relationships with 3 children to support the 4th. "It doesn't feel like courage," I admitted. "It feels like I'm watching my family disintegrate in slow motion, and I'm powerless to stop it." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Honey, your family disintegrated 3 years ago when those children decided that their prejudice was more important than their sister's happiness. You're not destroying anything. You're just refusing to pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't." She was right, of course. I had spent 3 years trying to maintain the fiction that we were still a functional family despite the gaping wound at our center. I had hosted holiday meals where Lily's empty chair sat like an accusation. I had listened to my grandchildren ask why Aunt Lily never visited anymore without knowing how to answer. I had pretended that my children's cruelty toward their sister was a minor disagreement that time would heal. But time hadn't healed anything. If anything, the wound had festered, growing more infected with each passing month. My children had become more entrenched in their positions, more convinced that they were the victims in this situation, more determined to force me to choose between them and Lily. Well, now they had their answer. I had chosen love over hate, acceptance over rejection, courage over cowardice. If that meant spending my remaining years estranged from 3 of my 4 children, so be it. At least I would be able to look at myself in the mirror each morning, knowing that I had stood up for what was right. The legal battle began in earnest a month later. Marcus had assembled a team of expensive attorneys who argued that I was suffering from diminished mental capacity, that Lily had manipulated me into changing my will, and that my decision was so irrational that it could only be explained by coercion or mental illness. It was humiliating to have my sanity questioned in open court, to listen to lawyers who had never met me argue that no reasonable person would make the choice I had made. But it was also enlightening to see how far my children were willing to go to get their hands on money they felt entitled to. The most painful moment came when Victoria took the witness stand and testified that I had become increasingly irrational and emotionally unstable since Harold's death. She painted a picture of a grief-stricken widow who had been manipulated by her mentally ill transgender child into making decisions that went against a lifetime of values and beliefs. "My mother was always a traditional woman who believed in family values and biblical principles," Victoria testified, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "She would never have made this decision if she had been thinking clearly. Lily has taken advantage of her vulnerability and turned her against her own children. Listening to my daughter lie about me under oath was devastating. But it was also clarifying. Victoria was willing to perjure herself, to publicly humiliate me, and to drag our family's private pain through the court system, rather than simply accept that I had made a conscious choice to support her sister. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke clearly and calmly about my decision. I explained that I had not been coerced or manipulated, that I was acting out of love rather than mental instability, and that my choice reflected my values rather than contradicting them. I believe in treating all people with dignity and respect, I told the court. I believe that love should triumph over fear, that families should support each other through difficult times, and that parents should stand by their children even when those children challenge social expectations. My decision to leave my estate to Lily reflects these values perfectly. The judge, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened carefully to all the testimony before rendering her verdict. She found that I was completely competent to make my own decisions about my estate, that there was no evidence of undue influence or coercion, and that my will would stand as written. It should be noted, Judge Morrison said in her final remarks, that a parent's decision about how to distribute their wealth is deeply personal and reflects their own values and relationships with their children. While the court understands that this decision is painful for the plaintiffs, it is not the court's role to second-guess a competent adult's choices about their own property. Marcus, Victoria, and Jonathan lost their lawsuit and were ordered to pay court costs. More importantly, they lost any remaining claim to moral authority in our family dispute. They had proven that they were willing to attack my mental capacity and lie about my character, rather than simply accept responsibility for their own behavior. The victory felt hollow, though. Winning in court didn't bring my family back together. It didn't heal the wounds that had been festering for years. It didn't change the fact that I was now estranged from 3 of my 4 children, probably permanently. But it did accomplish one important thing. It sent a clear message that actions have consequences, that cruelty toward vulnerable family members comes at a cost, and that love and acceptance are not negotiable values in the Martin family. 2 weeks after the court decision, I received an unexpected phone call from my grandson Michael, Victoria's 10-year-old son. He had somehow gotten hold of my phone number and called me while his mother was at work. Grandma Ruby, his young voice was confused and sad. Mom says we can't visit you anymore because you chose Aunt Lily over us. But I miss you. And I miss Aunt Lily too. Why can't we all just be a family again? My heart broke for this innocent child who was caught in the middle of an adult conflict he couldn't understand. Michael had always been close to Lily before her transition, and he was too young to comprehend why the grown-ups in his life had suddenly decided that love came with conditions. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "I haven't chosen anyone over anyone else. I love you and your sister Sarah more than you can possibly imagine. But your mommy has made some choices that make it hard for our family to be together right now." I couldn't explain the full situation to a 10-year-old, couldn't tell him that his mother's prejudice had torn our family apart. But I could let him know that he was loved, that the door would always be open for him, and that someday, when he was older, he might understand why some adults find it so hard to accept people who are different from them. "Can I still call you sometimes?" he asked, hopefully. "Even if Mom says we can't visit?" "Of course you can, sweetheart. You can call me anytime you want. And maybe someday soon, we can all be together again." I didn't know if that was true, but I needed to give this child some hope that the adults in his life might eventually find their way back to love and acceptance. That conversation with Michael strengthened my resolve to continue fighting for what was right. My grandchildren deserve to grow up in a world where they were taught to love and accept all people, where they learned that differences should be celebrated rather than feared, where they understood that family bonds are built on unconditional love rather than conditional approval. If that meant I had to be estranged from their parents for a while, so be it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to enable their worst impulses, even when that refusal comes at great personal cost. 6 months after the court decision, I received a letter that changed everything. It came from Victoria, written in her careful handwriting on expensive stationery, and it was unlike anything she had ever written to me before. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by regular mail with no fanfare or special handling. I almost didn't recognize Victoria's handwriting at first. It had been so long since she had written to me personally rather than communicating through lawyers or brief, cold phone calls about practical matters. "Dear Mom," the letter began, and already I could sense something different in her tone. The formal distance that had characterized our interactions for months seemed to have softened slightly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the court case ended, and I realize there are things I need to tell you. Things I should have said years ago but was too proud and too scared to admit. I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, and I understand if you throw this letter away without reading it. But I need to try to explain myself, not to justify what I did, but to help you understand how I got so lost." I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Harold and I had shared 47 years of morning coffee and evening conversations, and continued reading with a mixture of hope and caution. Victoria had hurt me deeply over the past 3 years, and I wasn't sure I was ready to open my heart to the possibility of reconciliation only to have it broken again. When Lucas first told us he was transitioning to become Lily, my first thought wasn't about religion or morality or family reputation. My first thought was that I was losing my little brother. I know that sounds selfish, but Lucas and I had always been close, and I felt like he was telling me that everything I remembered about our childhood together was somehow false or meaningless. I remembered that closeness between Victoria and the child I had known as Lucas. They were only 4 years apart in age, and they had shared secrets and adventures throughout their childhood. Victoria had been fiercely protective of her younger sibling, defending them against schoolyard bullies and including them in activities with older children. When Lucas had struggled with depression during high school, Victoria had been the one to notice and encourage them to talk to a counselor. Looking back now, Victoria continued in her letter, "I realized that depression might have been connected to the gender issues Lucas was dealing with, but at the time I just thought it was normal teenage angst. I was so focused on protecting the brother I thought I had that I couldn't see the sister who was trying to emerge." The letter went on to describe Victoria's confusion and fear during Lily's transition. She wrote about feeling like she was betraying her childhood memories by accepting that the brother she had loved was actually a sister she was just learning to know. She described the pressure she felt from Marcus and Jonathan to present a united front against what they saw as Lily's selfish disruption of family harmony. But the most revealing part of the letter came near the end, where Victoria finally admitted the real reason she had been so resistant to accepting Lily's transition. "I was pregnant with Michael when Lucas came out to us," she wrote. "I was scared and overwhelmed about becoming a mother, and I think I was clinging to familiar things to help me feel stable. The idea that my brother was actually my sister felt like one more thing in my life that was changing beyond my control. Instead of supporting Lily through her transition, I made it all about me and my own fears about change. I also need to confess something else, Mom. When I uninvited Lily from my wedding, it wasn't really about not wanting to explain her presence to Kevin's family. It was because I was afraid that having her there would force me to confront how badly I had been treating her. I was afraid that seeing her happy and confident and living authentically would make me realize how wrong I had been. So I took the coward's way out and excluded her instead of facing my own guilt and shame." The letter concluded with an apology that felt genuine and heartfelt, though I remained cautious about accepting it at face value. "I know I can't undo the damage I've done to our family, and I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't erase 3 years of cruelty and rejection. But I want you to know that I've been going to therapy to work through my issues with acceptance and change. I've been reading books about transgender experiences and trying to educate myself about what Lily went through. And I've been thinking about the values you and Dad tried to teach us about love and compassion and treating all people with dignity. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, and I don't expect you to change your will back. I understand that actions have consequences, and I'm prepared to live with mine. But I hope that someday we might be able to start rebuilding our relationship, and that maybe, eventually, I can earn the right to have a relationship with Lily again too. I love you, Mom, even though I know I haven't shown it very well lately. I hope you can find it in your heart to believe that I'm sincere about wanting to change and do better. Your daughter, Victoria." I read the letter 3 times before setting it aside and walking out to my garden, where I often went to think through difficult decisions. The spring flowers were just beginning to bloom, pushing through the soil with a determination that reminded me of Lily's courage in living her authentic life despite the obstacles she faced. Victoria's letter felt different from the manipulative appeals she had made during the court case. There was a vulnerability and self-awareness in her words that I hadn't seen from any of my children in years. But I had been disappointed before by false promises and temporary changes of heart. I needed to be sure that Victoria was genuinely committed to growth and not just looking for a way to get back into my good graces and potentially back into my will. I decided to test her sincerity in the most direct way possible. I picked up the phone and called Lily. "Sweetheart," I said when she answered, "I received an interesting letter from Victoria today. She says she's been thinking about things differently and wants to make amends. What do you think about that?" Lily was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I've been hoping for something like this for 3 years, Mom, but I'm also scared to get my hopes up." What exactly did she say? I read portions of Victoria's letter aloud, watching my words carefully to gauge Lily's reaction. I could hear the emotion in her voice as she listened, the mixture of hope and caution that I was feeling myself. It sounds like she's been doing some real soul-searching, Lily said finally. The part about her being afraid to confront her own guilt really resonates with me. I always suspected that part of the reason she was so angry with me was because she knew deep down that she was being cruel and unfair. Do you think we should give her a chance? I asked. I think we have to, Lily replied. Not because we owe her anything, but because holding on to anger and resentment hurts us more than it hurts her. If she's genuinely ready to change, then we should be open to that possibility. 2 weeks later, I invited Victoria to come for coffee, just the two of us. No children or lawyers or other family members to complicate the conversation. She arrived exactly on time, looking nervous and uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. She had brought a photo album with her, filled with pictures of Lily from childhood through early adulthood. As we sat at my kitchen table, she showed me image after image of the sibling she had loved and protected, pointing out moments of happiness and connection that she had somehow forgotten during the years of conflict. Look at this one, she said, pointing to a picture of herself and Lily at ages 16 and 12, dressed up for a school dance. I spent hours helping her get ready, teaching her how to tie a tie and comb her hair properly. I was so proud to be her big sister that night. She paused, studying the image more carefully. Looking at it now, I can see how uncomfortable she looks. The clothes don't fit right, the smile is forced. Everything about her body language screams that she's pretending to be someone she's not. How did I miss that at the time? We spent 2 hours going through those photos, with Victoria sharing memories and expressing regret about the way she had interpreted Lily's childhood behavior. She talked about signs she had missed or misunderstood, moments when Lily had tried to express her true identity but had been discouraged or dismissed. The most powerful moment came when Victoria showed me a letter that Lily had written to her when she was 14. A letter that Victoria had found recently while cleaning out old boxes in her attic. Dear Victoria, the letter read in Lily's careful teenage handwriting. I know this is going to sound weird, but sometimes I wish I had been born as your sister instead of your brother. I think I would have been happier that way. And we could have shared clothes and makeup and talked about boys together. I know that's not normal for guys to think about, but I can't help how I feel. I hope you don't think I'm strange for telling you this. Victoria's voice broke as she read the letter aloud. She was trying to tell me, even then. She was reaching out for help and understanding, and I completely missed it. I think I probably just laughed it off as a silly phase, or told her that boys couldn't be sisters. I could see the genuine remorse in Victoria's eyes, the weight of years of missed opportunities to support and understand her sibling. This wasn't the calculated manipulation I had seen during the court case. This was raw, honest grief about the damage she had done to someone she loved. But I still needed to know if her change of heart was genuine and lasting, or if it was just temporary guilt that would fade once the novelty wore off. Victoria, I said gently, it's easy to feel sorry about the past when you're looking at old photos and remembering happy times. But the real test is what you're willing to do going forward. Are you prepared to fully accept Lily as your sister, to defend her against anyone who treats her poorly, to include her in family events and treat her girlfriend Emma with respect and kindness? Victoria nodded emphatically. I've already started making changes, Mom. I told Kevin and the kids the truth about why Aunt Lily hasn't been around, and I explained that I had been wrong to exclude her from our family. Michael and Sarah have been asking when they can see her again. She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages she had been sending to Lily over the past week. They were simple messages, just checking in and expressing love and support, but they represented a dramatic shift from 3 years of silence. I know I have a lot of work to do to earn back her trust, Victoria continued. I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough to undo years of rejection and cruelty, but I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to rebuild our relationship, even if it takes years. I studied my daughter's face, looking for any sign of insincerity or hidden agenda. What I saw was a woman who had genuinely confronted her own shortcomings and was prepared to do the hard work of change and growth. All right, I said finally. Let's see if Lily is ready to take this conversation to the next level. I called Lily from my kitchen phone, putting the call on speaker so Victoria could participate in the conversation. When Lily answered, her voice was cautious but hopeful. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Victoria." "Hi, Lily," Victoria said, her own voice shaking with emotion. "I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, and I know that sorry doesn't fix 3 years of horrible treatment. But I want you to know that I've been working really hard to understand what I did wrong and to change the way I think about things." Lily was quiet for a moment before responding. "I appreciate that, Victoria. It means a lot to hear you say those things. But I need to know that this isn't just temporary guilt or a way to try to get back into Mom's will. I need to know that you genuinely accept me as your sister and that you're not going to change your mind again when it becomes inconvenient." Victoria took a deep breath before answering. "Lily, I want to meet with you in person if you're willing. I want to apologize face to face for the things I said and did. I want to meet Emma and get to know her as my sister-in-law. I want my children to have a relationship with their aunt. And I want to start including you in family events again, starting with Michael's birthday party next month." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Victoria and Lily tentatively beginning to rebuild the relationship that had been shattered 3 years earlier. It was awkward and emotional, filled with tears and apologies and careful negotiations about boundaries and expectations. But it was also filled with love and hope, and the possibility of healing. When we hung up, Victoria and I sat in silence for several minutes, both of us emotionally drained by the intensity of the conversation. "Thank you for giving me this chance, Mom," Victoria said finally. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful that you're willing to let me try to make things right." Over the following weeks, Victoria proved that her change of heart was genuine. She attended therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in family acceptance of LGBTQ individuals. She read books and articles about transgender experiences. She joined a support group for family members learning to accept and support transgender relatives. Most importantly, she began reaching out to Lily regularly, sending messages of support and encouragement, sharing family news and photos, and slowly rebuilding the connection they had lost. The first face-to-face meeting between Victoria and Lily took place at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop in Portland where Lily felt comfortable and safe. I drove up from home to be there for moral support, though I tried to stay in the background and let my daughters navigate their own reconciliation. When Victoria first saw Lily walk into the coffee shop, I watched her face carefully for any sign of shock or discomfort. What I saw instead was recognition and relief. The person walking toward us was still recognizably the sibling Victoria had grown up with, just happier and more confident than she had ever been before. "Lily," Victoria said, standing up as her sister approached the table. "You look beautiful. You look like yourself." They hugged hesitantly at first, then more firmly as 3 years of separation and pain began to melt away. Both of them were crying, and I had to wipe away tears of my own as I watched my daughters begin to heal the wounds that had torn our family apart. The conversation that followed was difficult and emotional, but it was also productive. Victoria apologized sincerely for her rejection and cruelty, while Lily expressed her own hurt and anger about being excluded from family events and treated like she didn't exist. But they also talked about positive memories from their childhood, shared interests they still had in common, and their hopes for rebuilding their relationship as adults. Victoria asked thoughtful questions about Lily's transition experience, showing genuine interest in understanding what her sister had gone through. Most importantly, Victoria asked to meet Emma, Lily's girlfriend, and to include both of them in family gatherings going forward. "I want my kids to know their aunt and their aunt's girlfriend," Victoria said. "I want them to grow up understanding that love comes in many forms, and that family means accepting people for who they are, not who we think they should be." The meeting lasted 3 hours, and by the end, both sisters were cautiously optimistic about the future of their relationship. They made plans to get together again the following weekend, and Victoria invited Lily and Emma to Michael's upcoming birthday party. As we prepared to leave, Victoria turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I know I can't undo the damage I did to our family, and I know it will take time to rebuild trust. But I want you to know how grateful I am that you stood up for Lily when the rest of us wouldn't. You showed us what real love looks like, even when it cost you everything." The road to full reconciliation was not smooth or quick. There were setbacks and misunderstandings, moments when old patterns of behavior threatened to reassert themselves. Victoria had to learn new ways of thinking and speaking about transgender issues, and Lily had to work through years of hurt and rejection before she could fully trust her sister again. But gradually, over months of consistent effort and genuine commitment to change, the relationship between my daughters began to heal. Victoria started including Lily in family text message groups and photo sharing. She invited Lily and Emma to Sarah's dance recital and Michael's soccer games. She began referring to Lily as her sister in conversations with friends and neighbors, defending her against anyone who expressed disapproval or prejudice. The transformation in our family dynamics was remarkable. Holiday gatherings, which had been tense and incomplete for 3 years, began to feel like celebrations again. My grandchildren, who had been confused and hurt by the sudden absence of their aunt, were overjoyed to have Lily back in their lives. Michael, in particular, formed a strong bond with Lily and Emma. At 10 years old, he was old enough to understand that some adults had been unfair to his aunt, but young enough to accept her transgender identity without question or judgment. He began introducing Lily to his friends as his aunt, who used to be his uncle, but was much happier now as a girl. Sarah, at 7, simply accepted that Aunt Lily was part of the family again, and that she had a new Aunt Emma, who was really good at braiding hair and playing video games. Children, I reflected, often handled change and difference much better than adults did. The success of Victoria's transformation gave me hope that Marcus and Jonathan might eventually come around as well. But it also highlighted how far they still had to go before our family could be truly whole again. Marcus remained completely inflexible in his position, viewing Victoria's reconciliation with Lily as a betrayal of their sibling alliance against what he continued to see as unacceptable behavior. When Victoria invited Lily to Michael's birthday party, Marcus refused to attend, stating that he would not expose his children to what he called the corruption of family values. Jonathan followed Marcus's lead, as he always had. He was less vocal in his opposition than Marcus, but he maintained the same stance of complete rejection and refusal to acknowledge Lily's existence. The division in our family had shifted, but it hadn't disappeared. Instead of 3 children rejecting 1, we now had 2 children rejecting 2, with me caught in the middle trying to maintain relationships with everyone, while standing firm on my principles of love and acceptance. Victoria, to her credit, didn't let her brother's continued rejection discourage her from her own journey of reconciliation with Lily. She had learned to stand up for what she believed was right, even when it meant going against family pressure or social expectations. "I'm done letting Marcus and Jonathan make decisions for me about who I can love and accept," she told me one evening, as we planned another family gathering that would include Lily and Emma but exclude her brothers. "I wasted 3 years of my life because I was too weak to think for myself. I won't make that mistake again." The change in Victoria also extended to her parenting style. She began teaching Michael and Sarah about diversity and acceptance in age-appropriate ways, reading them books about different types of families, and encouraging them to ask questions about the world around them. When Michael came home from school one day asking about a classmate who had 2 moms, Victoria was able to explain that families come in many forms, and that love is what makes a family, not specific gender roles or traditional structures. She also became an advocate for LGBTQ issues in her community, joining the Parent-Teacher Association at her children's school and pushing for more inclusive curricula and anti-bullying policies. The woman who had once been embarrassed by her transgender sister was now actively working to create a more accepting world for all LGBTQ individuals. But perhaps the most significant change in Victoria was her willingness to challenge other family members and friends when they expressed prejudice or discrimination. She had always been conflict-averse, preferring to keep the peace rather than stand up for unpopular positions. Now she was learning to use her voice to defend vulnerable people, even when it made others uncomfortable. When her mother-in-law made a disparaging comment about transgender people during a family dinner, Victoria firmly but politely corrected her and explained why such language was hurtful. When a neighbor complained about a transgender teenager at the local high school, Victoria shared information about the challenges LGBTQ youth face and encouraged empathy and understanding. These were small acts of courage, But they represented a fundamental shift in Victoria's character. She was no longer willing to be a passive bystander when injustice occurred, even in social situations where speaking up might create tension or conflict. The ripple effects of Victoria's transformation extended beyond our immediate family. Her husband, Kevin, who had initially been skeptical about Lily's transition, began to change his own attitudes as he saw the positive impact of acceptance and inclusion on his wife and children. Kevin started asking thoughtful questions about transgender experiences and reading articles Victoria shared with him. He began using Lily's correct name and pronouns consistently, and he welcomed Emma into family gatherings with genuine warmth and respect. Their children, Michael and Sarah, became ambassadors of acceptance in their own social circles. When classmates made jokes about LGBTQ people or used slurs, they spoke up and explained why such language was hurtful. They talked openly about their Aunt Lily and Aunt Emma, normalizing transgender relationships for their peers. The transformation of one family member had created a cascade of positive change that extended far beyond our immediate household. Victoria's journey from rejection to acceptance had not only healed our family, but had also made the world a slightly more tolerant and understanding place. As I watched Victoria and Lily's relationship continue to strengthen and grow, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the decision I had made to change my will. That difficult choice had forced my family to confront uncomfortable truths about love, acceptance, and what it truly means to be family. It had cost me relationships with two of my children, at least temporarily. It had put me through the stress and humiliation of a court battle. It had forced me to stand alone against family pressure and social expectations. But it had also saved the relationship between two daughters who had once been inseparable. It had taught my grandchildren valuable lessons about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It had shown Victoria that she had the strength to think for herself and make moral choices based on love rather than fear. Most importantly, it had demonstrated to Lily that she was worthy of being fought for, that her identity and dignity were worth defending, and that true family love is unconditional and unwavering. The letter from Victoria had been the first crack in the wall of rejection that had surrounded Lily for 3 years. But it had taken courage, commitment, and consistent action to turn that crack into an opening through which love and acceptance could flow again. As spring turned to summer, our reconstituted family settled into new rhythms and traditions. Sunday dinners once again included all the people I loved most, even if that group looked different than it had before. Holiday celebrations were marked by joy and inclusion, rather than tension and exclusion. The empty chair at our table was no longer Lily's, but Marcus's and Jonathan's. I mourned their absence and continued to hope that they might eventually follow Victoria's example and find their way back to love and acceptance. But I no longer felt the desperate urgency to fix our family dysfunction that had consumed me for 3 years. I had learned that you cannot force people to love and accept others, but you can refuse to reward them for choosing hatred and rejection. Some battles are worth fighting, even when the cost is high. Some principles are worth defending, even when it means standing alone. Some love is worth protecting, even when it means sacrificing other relationships. The woman who had sat in that lawyer's office 6 months earlier, changing her will to disinherit 3 of her 4 children, had been driven by anger and disappointment. The woman I had become through this journey was motivated by something much more powerful: the understanding that love, true love, requires courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to do what's right even when it's difficult. Victoria's transformation had given me hope that change was possible, that people could grow and learn and choose love over fear. But it had also taught me that such change must come from within, that it cannot be forced or mandated or bribed into existence. As I looked ahead to whatever time I had left on this earth, I felt a sense of peace about the choices I had made and the legacy I would leave behind. Some of my children would inherit my money, and some would not. But all of them would inherit the knowledge that their mother had stood up for love, acceptance, and human dignity when it mattered most. That was the inheritance that truly mattered, the one that could not be contested in court or diminished by legal challenges. It was the inheritance of knowing that love wins, even when the victory comes at great personal cost. The investigation began with a phone call I never expected to receive. It was a crisp October morning, exactly 8 months after Victoria's successful reconciliation with Lily, when my phone rang at 7:30 in the morning. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something compelled me to answer despite the early hour. "Mrs. Martin," a hesitant voice said. "My name is David Chen, and I think we need to talk about your son Marcus and my daughter Jenny." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, already sensing that this conversation was going to change everything I thought I understood about my eldest son's rigid moral stance. David Chen proceeded to tell me a story that would unravel the carefully constructed image Marcus had built of himself as a defender of traditional family values. "Jenny is my youngest daughter," David explained, his voice filled with pain and exhaustion. "She's been struggling with her gender identity for the past 2 years, and last month she came out to us as transgender. She wants to transition from male to female, and my wife and I have been trying to learn how to support her through this process." My heart went out to this father who was walking the same difficult path I had traveled with Lily. But I couldn't understand why he was calling me, or what connection his daughter might have to Marcus. "The reason I'm calling you," David continued, "is because your son Marcus has been having a secret relationship with my daughter for the past 6 months. They met at a support group for families dealing with transgender issues, and they've been meeting regularly ever since." The words hit me like a physical blow. Marcus, who had spent 3 years denouncing transgender people as mentally ill and refusing to accept his own sister, had been secretly attending support groups and maintaining a relationship with a transgender teenager. "I need you to understand," David said, his voice growing more urgent. "Marcus has been incredibly supportive of Jenny. He's been like a mentor to her, helping her navigate the transition process, connecting her with resources, even driving her to medical appointments when my wife and I couldn't get time off work." I listened in stunned silence as David described a version of my son that I didn't recognize. According to this stranger, Marcus had been attending monthly support group meetings for parents and siblings of transgender individuals. He had been reading books and articles about gender identity. He had been providing emotional and practical support to a transgender teenager whose own family was struggling to accept her. "But here's the thing that's been bothering me," David continued. "Jenny mentioned that Marcus has a transgender sister himself, but that he doesn't have any contact with her. She's been encouraging him to reach out to his sister, to apply what he's learned through our support group to his own family situation. But he keeps making excuses about why he can't do that." The hypocrisy was staggering. While publicly maintaining his stance that Lily was mentally ill and that I was enabling dangerous delusions, Marcus had been privately educating himself about transgender issues and supporting another family through the exact same challenges. David explained that Jenny had become suspicious about Marcus's reluctance to discuss his own family situation. She had done some internet research and discovered the court case surrounding my will, the public records showing that Marcus had sued me for disinheriting him after he rejected his transgender sister. "She's devastated," David said. "This man she's come to trust and depend on has been lying to her about his own values and behavior. She feels like he's been using her situation to work through his own guilt without actually taking responsibility for the harm he's caused his own family." I asked David for his contact information and arranged to meet with him and his wife the following weekend. I needed to understand the full scope of Marcus's deception and figure out how to confront my son about his double life. The drive to David and Linda Chen's home in the suburbs took me through neighborhoods I rarely visited, past strip malls and housing developments that had sprung up during the economic boom of the past decade. Their house was a modest 2-story colonial, with a well-maintained garden and children's bicycles scattered across the front lawn. David and Linda welcomed me with the exhausted hospitality of parents dealing with a family crisis. They were both in their early 50s, hardworking people who ran a small accounting firm together and had raised 3 children while building their business from the ground up. Over coffee in their living room, they told me the full story of their relationship with Marcus and how it had developed over the past 6 months. Jenny had started questioning her gender identity during her sophomore year of high school, Linda explained. She had always been what people called a sensitive boy, interested in art and music rather than sports, more comfortable with female friends than male ones. But it wasn't until she encountered transgender stories online that she began to understand what she was feeling. The process of coming out had been traumatic for their family. David admitted that his first reaction had been denial and anger, while Linda had immediately begun researching medical treatments and legal protections. Their older children had been supportive but confused, unsure how to navigate their changing relationship with their sibling. That's when their family counselor recommended a support group for parents and siblings of transgender individuals. It was at one of these monthly meetings that they had met Marcus. He introduced himself as having a transgender sister, David said. He seemed very knowledgeable about the challenges families face, and he was incredibly helpful in sharing resources and offering practical advice. Jenny connected with him immediately because he was one of the few people in the group who was close to her age and could relate to the sibling perspective. Marcus had become a regular fixture in their lives, attending Jenny's medical appointments, helping her shop for clothes that matched her gender identity, and providing emotional support during the difficult early stages of her transition. He had even helped pay for some of her medical expenses when their insurance coverage fell short. But he never talked about his own sister, Linda added. Whenever Jenny asked about his family situation, he would deflect or change the subject. He said it was too painful to discuss, that his sister had cut contact with the family and he was still working through his feelings about it. The level of deception was breathtaking. Marcus had not only been lying to this family about his own behavior toward Lily, but he had been actively helping another transgender person while simultaneously rejecting his own sister. I asked to meet Jenny, and David and Linda agreed, though they warned me that she was feeling betrayed and confused about Marcus's dishonesty. When she came downstairs to join our conversation, I immediately understood why Marcus had connected with her. At 17, Jenny had the same gentle demeanor and artistic sensibilities that Lily had shown at that age. "Mrs. Martin," Jenny said, settling into the chair across from me. "I'm so sorry about what happened with your family. I had no idea that Marcus was the brother who sued you in court. I feel like I've been living in some kind of weird alternate reality, where the person I trusted was actually the villain in his own family's story." I could see the genuine distress in her eyes, the confusion of a young person who had believed she'd found a mentor and ally only to discover that he was living a lie. "Can you help me understand something?" Jenny asked. "How can someone be so supportive and understanding with strangers but so cruel to his own family? Marcus has been amazing with me. He's never once made me feel ashamed or wrong about being transgender. He's defended me against people who've said hurtful things. But according to what I've read online, he's done the exact opposite with his own sister." It was a question I couldn't answer because I didn't understand it myself. How could Marcus spend months learning about transgender experiences, developing empathy and understanding, building meaningful relationships with transgender individuals, and still maintain his rejection of Lily? "I think he's been trying to work through his guilt without actually facing it," I said finally. "It's easier to be supportive of strangers than to admit you've been wrong about your own family. Supporting you allows him to feel like a good person without having to acknowledge the harm he's caused Lily." Over the next 2 hours, Jenny shared stories about her relationship with Marcus that painted a picture of someone who was genuinely knowledgeable about and committed to transgender rights and support. He had helped her navigate school administrators who were resistant to using her preferred name and pronouns. He had connected her with other transgender teenagers through online support networks. He had even accompanied her to Pride events where he seemed completely comfortable and accepting of LGBTQ culture. But he had also been consistently evasive about his own family situation, creating an elaborate fiction about being estranged from his sister due to her choices rather than his own rejection of her identity. The most damaging revelation came when Jenny showed me text message conversations between herself and Marcus. In these private communications, he had expressed views about transgender acceptance and family support that were the complete opposite of everything he had said publicly about Lily. "Families should love and accept you for who you are," one message read. "Anyone who rejects their transgender child or sibling is choosing fear over love, and that's not real family." Another message offered advice that he had never followed himself. "The most important thing is to use your sister's chosen name and pronouns consistently, even when she's not around." That shows respect for her identity and helps normalize transgender experiences for everyone in your family. Reading these messages felt like discovering that my son was leading a double life, maintaining completely contradictory belief systems depending on his audience. With Jenny and the support group, he was a progressive ally who understood the importance of acceptance and inclusion. With our family, he remained the rigid traditionalist who saw transgender identity as a mental illness that should not be accommodated. I spent the rest of that weekend processing what I had learned and planning how to confront Marcus about his deception. This wasn't just about his treatment of Lily anymore. This was about his fundamental dishonesty, his willingness to manipulate vulnerable people, and his complete lack of integrity in maintaining these contradictory positions. On Monday morning, I called Marcus at his office and informed him that I needed to see him immediately for a family emergency. His assistant scheduled me for a lunch meeting, probably assuming I was ready to apologize and restore his inheritance. Marcus's office reflected his success as a corporate executive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, expensive furniture conveyed authority and wealth, and awards and certificates covered the walls like trophies of his professional achievements. He greeted me with the cautious optimism of someone who thought he might be about to get what he wanted. "Mother," he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk. "I'm glad you called. I've been hoping we could find a way to move past this unpleasant situation with the will." I set my purse on his desk and pulled out a folder containing printouts of the text messages Jenny had shared with me, along with photographs David had taken of Marcus at support group meetings and pride events. "Tell me about Jenny Chen," I said, placing the evidence in front of him. The change in Marcus's expression was immediate and dramatic. The confident executive facade crumbled, replaced by the look of a child caught in an elaborate lie. His face went pale, and his hands began to shake slightly as he recognized the photographs. "I don't know what you think you've discovered," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know that you've been attending support groups for families with transgender children for the past 6 months," I said calmly. "I know that you've been mentoring a 17-year-old transgender girl, helping her with medical appointments and providing emotional support through her transition. I know that you've been expressing views about transgender acceptance and family support that are the complete opposite of everything you've said about Lily." Marcus stared at the evidence in front of him, unable to formulate a response. For the first time since Lily's coming out 3 years earlier, my eldest son was speechless. "What I want to understand," I continued, "is how you can spend months learning about transgender experiences, developing empathy for transgender individuals, and supporting a teenage girl through her transition, while simultaneously maintaining that your own sister is mentally ill and deserving of rejection." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "It's different," he said. "Jenny is different from Lily." "How exactly is she different?" I asked. "They're both transgender women who came out to their families and needed support through their transitions. They're both young people who were brave enough to live authentically despite social pressure and family rejection. What makes Jenny worthy of your support while Lily deserves your cruelty?" Marcus struggled to articulate an answer that made sense even to himself. "Jenny was younger when she came out," he said finally. "She was still figuring things out. Lily had already lived as a man for 28 years. It felt like deception, like she had been lying to us about who she was. The justification was so weak that even Marcus seemed to recognize its inadequacy as soon as he spoke it. I could see in his face that he was grappling with the cognitive dissonance of his contradictory positions. "Marcus," I said gently, because despite everything, he was still my son and I could see his pain. "You've spent 6 months learning everything I tried to teach you 3 years ago. You understand now that transgender identity isn't a choice or a mental illness. You understand that family support is crucial for transgender individuals. You understand that rejection and cruelty cause real psychological harm." He nodded reluctantly, unable to deny the truth of what I was saying. "So why haven't you applied any of this understanding to your relationship with Lily? Why have you been able to show compassion and support to Jenny while maintaining your rejection of your own sister?" The question hung in the air between us as Marcus wrestled with an answer he didn't want to give. "Because I was wrong," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Because I was cruel and ignorant, and too proud to admit it. Because the longer I maintained my position, the harder it became to back down without looking like a complete hypocrite. The admission had cost him enormous effort, and I could see tears forming in his eyes as he continued. When Lily first came out, I reacted with fear and anger instead of love and support. I made it about me and my comfort instead of her needs and happiness. And then, when you changed your will and took me to court, I doubled down on my position, because admitting I was wrong would have meant admitting that I deserved to be disinherited. He picked up one of the photographs showing him at a pride event, smiling and comfortable in an environment he had once viewed with suspicion and disdain. Working with Jenny and her family has taught me everything I should have learned 3 years ago, he said. But I didn't know how to bridge the gap between who I've become and who I was to Lily. I didn't know how to apologize for 3 years of cruelty and rejection. I didn't know if she would ever forgive me or if I even deserved forgiveness. I studied my son's face, seeing genuine remorse and self-awareness that I hadn't witnessed since he was a child. This wasn't the calculated manipulation I had experienced during the court case. This was raw, honest acknowledgement of his failures and genuine regret about the harm he had caused. But I also saw the cowardice that had prevented him from acting on his evolving understanding. He had been content to work through his guilt and shame by helping strangers while leaving his own family relationships broken and unhealed. Marcus, I said, I'm not the person you need to apologize to. I'm not the one you've hurt most with your rejection and cruelty. If you're genuinely ready to make amends, you need to start with Lily. He nodded, wiping away tears with the back of his hand. I know. I've known for months. Every time Jenny talks about how important family support has been for her transition, I think about how we failed Lily. Every time I see how much our acceptance means to Jenny, I think about how much our rejection must have hurt Lily. The conversation continued for another hour, with Marcus describing his journey of education and self-discovery through the support group. He talked about reading books and articles that challenged his preconceptions about gender identity. He described listening to other parents share their experiences of learning to accept and support their transgender children. Most powerfully, he talked about witnessing Jenny's transformation from a depressed, anxious teenager to a confident, happy young woman as her family learned to support her authentic identity. Seeing Jenny flourish with family support made me realize what we might have had with Lily if I hadn't been so stubborn and afraid, he said. I've spent 3 years convincing myself that we were protecting family values, but what we were really doing was destroying our family out of ignorance and fear. But understanding his mistakes and feeling guilty about them was only the first step. The real test would be whether Marcus was willing to take concrete action to repair the damage he had done. I want to reach out to Lily, he said. I want to apologize and ask for the chance to rebuild our relationship. But I'm scared that it's too late, that I've caused too much harm for her to ever trust me again. It might be too late, I said honestly. 3 years of rejection and cruelty can't be undone with a simple apology. But if you're genuinely committed to change, if you're willing to do the hard work of earning back her trust, then it's worth trying. I pulled out my phone and showed him recent photos of Lily and Emma at family gatherings, images that Victoria had been sharing in our family group chat. Marcus studied the pictures with the intensity of someone trying to memorize important details. She looks happy, he said softly. She looks like herself in a way she never did before. She is happy, I confirmed. She's built a good life with people who love and accept her. She has a successful career, a loving relationship, and a chosen family of friends who support her. She doesn't need our family for her happiness anymore. The statement was intended to make Marcus understand that any reconciliation would have to be on Lily's terms, not his. She no longer needed his approval or acceptance to feel complete. If he wanted a relationship with his sister, he would have to prove that he deserved one. Over the following days, Marcus began the difficult process of transitioning from secret ally to public advocate. He started by being honest with Jenny and her family about his own situation, apologizing for his deception and explaining his journey of growth and learning. Jenny was hurt and angry about his dishonesty, but she also recognized the genuine change in his understanding and commitment to transgender rights. With her parents' support, she agreed to help Marcus navigate the process of reaching out to Lily, sharing her own insights about what meaningful apologies and behavior change looked like from a transgender perspective. Marcus also began preparing for the conversation with Lily by working with a family therapist who specialized in LGBTQ issues and family reconciliation. He spent weeks crafting an apology letter that acknowledged the specific harms he had caused, took full responsibility for his actions, and outlined concrete steps he was taking to change his behavior and thinking. But before reaching out to Lily directly, he made a public gesture that demonstrated his commitment to change. He wrote a letter to the editor of our local newspaper, acknowledging his previous treatment of his transgender sister and expressing his support for LGBTQ rights and acceptance. 3 years ago, my sister came out as transgender, and I responded with ignorance, fear, and cruelty, the letter read. I rejected her identity, excluded her from family events, and contributed to a family environment that caused her tremendous pain. I was wrong, and I want to publicly acknowledge my mistakes and apologize for the harm I caused. The letter went on to describe his journey of education and growth, his work with Jenny's family, and his commitment to becoming an advocate for transgender rights and acceptance. I have learned that transgender identity is not a choice or a mental illness, but a fundamental aspect of who someone is, he wrote. I have learned that family support is crucial for transgender individuals, and that rejection and cruelty can cause lasting psychological harm. Most importantly, I have learned that love means accepting people for who they are, not who we think they should be. The letter concluded with a direct appeal to Lily and a commitment to ongoing advocacy. To my sister Lily, if you are reading this, I want you to know that I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. I understand if you cannot forgive me, and I respect whatever boundaries you need to maintain for your own well-being. But I want you to know that I see you, I accept you, and I am proud to call you my sister. Publication of the letter created a minor sensation in our small community. Marcus received dozens of responses, some supportive and others critical of his change in position. But most importantly, it served as a public declaration that he was willing to stake his reputation on his support for his transgender sister. The letter also served another purpose. It gave Lily control over whether and how to respond to his outreach. Rather than ambushing her with a phone call or showing up at her home uninvited, Marcus had made a public statement that she could choose to acknowledge or ignore according to her own comfort level. 3 days after the letter was published, Lily called me. "Mom," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I saw Marcus's letter in the newspaper. Is this real, or is this some kind of manipulation to try to get back into your will?" "It's real, sweetheart," I said. "I've seen the evidence of his work with other transgender families. I've watched him educate himself and develop genuine understanding and empathy. I believe his remorse is sincere." Lily was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I don't know how to feel about this," she said finally. "Part of me is relieved that he's finally acknowledged what he did wrong. But part of me is angry that it took him 3 years and helping a stranger to figure out what he should have known about his own sister." "Those are completely valid feelings," I told her. "You don't owe him forgiveness just because he's finally ready to apologize. You get to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want to have with him going forward." Over the following weeks, Lily wrestled with how to respond to Marcus's outreach. She consulted with her therapist, talked through her feelings with Emma and Victoria, and carefully considered what kind of contact, if any, she was comfortable having with her oldest brother. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his advocacy work, speaking at local LGBTQ organizations and support groups about his journey from rejection to acceptance. He established a scholarship fund for transgender students at the local community college, donating money from his own savings rather than waiting for any potential inheritance. He also maintained his relationship with Jenny and her family, serving as a mentor and advocate as she continued her transition journey. But now he did so with complete honesty about his own family situation and his ongoing efforts to repair the relationships he had damaged. The investigation into Marcus's double life had revealed something I hadn't expected. That change was possible even for people who seemed completely fixed in their prejudices and beliefs. It had shown that education, exposure, and genuine relationships with transgender individuals could overcome years of conditioning and fear. But it had also revealed the complex psychology of guilt and shame, the ways people could work through their issues indirectly rather than facing them head-on. Marcus had spent months becoming the brother Lily deserved, while still maintaining his rejection of Lily herself. As I watched him navigate his journey of growth and accountability, I felt a complicated mixture of pride and frustration. I was proud that he had developed genuine understanding and empathy for transgender experiences. I was pleased that he was using his privilege and resources to support LGBTQ rights and acceptance. But I was also frustrated that it had taken him so long to apply his learning to his own family relationships, and that he had been willing to help strangers while leaving his sister to suffer the consequences of his rejection. The investigation had also revealed something about myself, that my decision to change my will had not just been about punishment or consequences, but about forcing my family to confront uncomfortable truths about their own behavior and values. Marcus's double life might have continued indefinitely if not for Jenny's curiosity and internet research. He might have gone on being a supportive advocate for transgender rights in public, while maintaining his rejection of Lily in private. The inheritance dispute had created the public record that exposed his hypocrisy and forced him to confront the contradictions in his behavior. But understanding Marcus's journey also raised questions about Jonathan, my youngest son, who had followed his older brother's lead in rejecting Lily but had remained silent throughout the recent developments. While Marcus had been secretly educating himself and developing empathy, what had Jonathan been doing? Was he simply waiting to see which way the wind blew, or was he maintaining his own double life that had yet to be discovered? The investigation into Marcus's secret advocacy work had answered some questions about my family's dysfunction, but it had also raised new ones. As I prepared for whatever revelations might come next, I reflected on the complex journey of forgiveness, growth, and accountability that was reshaping our family in ways I never could have anticipated. Change was possible, Marcus had proven that. But change required more than just private growth and understanding. It required the courage to publicly acknowledge mistakes, the humility to ask for forgiveness, and the commitment to take concrete action to repair the harm that had been done. The investigation was far from over, and I sensed that more surprises lay ahead as our family continued to grapple with the consequences of years of rejection, secrecy, and deception. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt hopeful that healing was possible, even for relationships that had seemed irreparably broken. The phone call from Lily came on a quiet Thursday evening in December, nearly 2 months after Marcus's public letter had been published in the newspaper. I was sitting in my living room, working on a quilt for Emma's upcoming birthday, when her familiar voice filled the room with a calm determination I hadn't heard in years. "Mom," she said, "I've made a decision about Marcus. I want to meet with him, but I need you to be there as a mediator. Can you arrange something for this weekend?" The request caught me off guard, though I realized I'd been hoping for this call since Marcus's letter appeared in print. Lily had taken her time processing his public apology, consulting with her therapist and support network, carefully weighing the risks and benefits of reopening contact with her oldest brother. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied. "What made you decide you're ready for this conversation?" Lily's voice was thoughtful and measured as she explained her reasoning. "I've been thinking about forgiveness. Not for his sake, but for mine. I've realized that carrying anger and resentment is exhausting, and I want to be free of that burden. But I also want to make sure that if we're going to rebuild any kind of relationship, it's built on honesty and genuine change, not just guilt and remorse." She paused, and I could hear Emma's voice in the background, offering quiet support and encouragement. "I've also been thinking about Jenny Chen," Lily continued. "That girl deserves to have the support system she's built with Marcus, even if I decide I can't have a relationship with him myself. I don't want my hurt to interfere with her healing journey." The generosity of spirit in that statement took my breath away. Even after years of rejection and cruelty, Lily was thinking about how her decisions might affect another transgender teenager's well-being. It was a level of emotional maturity and compassion that humbled me as her mother. I called Marcus that evening and arranged for a meeting at my house the following Saturday afternoon. I chose the neutral territory of my living room, the same space where so many family conversations had taken place over the years. both joyful and painful. Marcus arrived 30 minutes early, pacing nervously in my driveway before finally working up the courage to knock on my door. He looked like he hadn't slept well in weeks, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the stress he was carrying. "Thank you for arranging this, Mom," he said as he settled into the same chair he'd occupied during countless family gatherings. "I know I don't deserve this opportunity, but I'm grateful Lily is willing to talk to me." When Lily and Emma arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. Marcus stood up immediately, his face flushing with emotion as he saw his sister for the first time in 3 years. Lily looked confident and beautiful, her long hair styled elegantly, wearing a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes. She moved with a grace and self-assurance that spoke to the inner peace she'd found during her years of living authentically. Emma stayed close to Lily's side, a protective presence who radiated quiet strength and unwavering support. I could see Marcus taking in the details of their relationship, the way they communicated with subtle glances and gentle touches, the obvious love and respect they shared. "Hello, Marcus," Lily said, her voice steady but cautious. "Thank you for the letter. It meant something to me that you were willing to make a public statement about your mistakes." Marcus's eyes filled with tears as he responded. "Lily, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for the cruel things I said, for the way I rejected you, for the 3 years I wasted being too proud and stubborn to see what should have been obvious from the beginning." He pulled out a folder of documents and photographs, spreading them on the coffee table between them. "These are pictures from the support group meetings I've been attending," he said. "Letters from other families I've worked with, documentation of the advocacy work I've been doing. I want you to see that my change isn't just words, that I've been actively working to understand and support transgender rights." Lily examined the materials carefully, asking pointed questions about his work with Jenny's family and his involvement in local LGBTQ organizations. She wasn't interested in empty apologies or vague promises of change. She wanted concrete evidence that his transformation was real and lasting. "What I don't understand," she said finally, "is how you could spend months helping other transgender people while still maintaining your rejection of me. How do you reconcile supporting Jenny through her transition while calling me mentally ill?" Marcus winced at the directness of her question, but he didn't try to deflect or minimize his hypocrisy. "There's no good answer to that question," he said honestly. "I was a coward who was more comfortable helping strangers than facing my own mistakes. Working with Jenny allowed me to feel like a good person without having to acknowledge the harm I'd caused you. It was selfish and dishonest, and I'm ashamed of it." The conversation continued for nearly 3 hours, with Lily systematically working through her hurt and anger while Marcus listened and took responsibility for his actions. Emma occasionally offered supportive comments or asked clarifying questions, serving as both advocate and witness to this difficult reconciliation process. The turning point came when Lily asked about their father's reaction to her transition. Harold had died just 6 months after she came out, and Marcus had never shared his evolving thoughts about his daughter's identity. "Dad was trying to understand," Marcus said quietly. "In those last few months, he was reading books you recommended, practicing using your name and pronouns. He told me once that he was proud of your courage, that it must have taken tremendous strength to live authentically, despite knowing it might cost you your family." Marcus paused, wiping away tears as he continued. "He also told me that I was making the biggest mistake of my life by rejecting you. He said that families are supposed to love each other through change and growth, not abandon each other when things get difficult. I should have listened to him." This revelation seemed to affect Lily more than anything else that had been shared. She had always wondered what their father really thought about her transition. Whether his awkward but genuine attempts at acceptance reflected his true feelings, or just his desire to keep peace in the family. "He really said that?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "He really did," Marcus confirmed. "He was worried about you, about whether you were safe and happy. He made me promise to look out for you after he was gone, and I failed him completely. I failed you both." As the afternoon wore on, the conversation shifted from confrontation to exploration of what a rebuilt relationship might look like. Lily was clear about her boundaries and expectations, while Marcus expressed his commitment to ongoing growth and accountability. "I need you to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," Lily said. "I'm willing to work toward rebuilding our relationship, but it has to be based on your actions, not your promises." I need to see consistent support and advocacy, not just when it's convenient or comfortable for you. Marcus nodded emphatically. I understand completely. I know I have to earn your trust back, and I'm prepared to do whatever that takes for as long as it takes. They agreed to start slowly, with monthly check-in calls and gradual inclusion in family events. Marcus would continue his advocacy work and keep Lily informed about his activities. Most importantly, he would begin the process of reaching out to his own children, Marcus Jr. and Rebecca, to educate them about their aunt's identity and help them develop accepting attitudes. The meeting ended with a cautious hug between siblings, who were beginning to find their way back to each other. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a foundation upon which they could build something new and healthier. After Lily and Emma left, Marcus and I sat in my living room processing what had just occurred. She's remarkable, Mom, he said. After everything we put her through, she's still willing to give me a chance to make things right. I don't know if I would be that generous if our situations were reversed. That's the difference between the two of you, I replied. She's learned to choose love over fear, while you spent 3 years choosing fear over love. But you're learning now, and that's what matters. The success of Marcus's reconciliation with Lily created momentum for addressing the remaining dysfunction in our family. Jonathan, my youngest son, had maintained his silence throughout the public drama surrounding Marcus's transformation, but his position was becoming increasingly untenable. Unlike Marcus, who had been vocal in his rejection of Lily, Jonathan had simply followed his older brother's lead without articulating his own position. He had attended family events where Lily was excluded, participated in conversations where she was discussed as if she didn't exist, and generally supported the family's rejection of her through his passive compliance. But as Victoria rebuilt her relationship with Lily and Marcus began his own reconciliation process, Jonathan found himself increasingly isolated in his stance. He was the only family member still maintaining complete rejection of his transgender sister, and that position was becoming harder to defend as the rest of the family moved toward acceptance and inclusion. The confrontation with Jonathan came during our family's Christmas Eve gathering, the first holiday celebration in 3 years that included both Lily and Marcus. Victoria had volunteered to host the dinner at her house, creating a neutral space where everyone could come together without the weight of old associations. Jonathan arrived late and clearly uncomfortable, bringing his wife Sarah and their twin daughters but maintaining obvious distance from Lily and Emma. He was polite but cold, answering direct questions with minimal responses and avoiding eye contact with his transgender sister. The tension was noticeable to everyone, especially the children, who couldn't understand why Uncle Jonathan was being unfriendly to Aunt Lily and Aunt Emma. Marcus Jr. and Rebecca, who had been gradually educated about their aunt's identity, kept looking between their father and uncle with confused expressions. The breaking point came during the gift exchange, when Lily presented Jonathan's daughters with carefully chosen art supplies and books, remembering their interests from years past. The girls were delighted with their presents, chattering excitedly about the drawing pads and colored pencils their aunt had selected. But Jonathan's reaction was immediate and harsh. "Girls," he said firmly, putting himself between his daughters and Lily, "we need to go wash our hands before dinner." It was a transparent attempt to limit his children's interaction with their aunt, and everyone in the room recognized it as such. The girls looked confused and disappointed, having been enjoying their conversation with Lily about art and creativity. "Actually," Lily said quietly, standing up from where she'd been kneeling beside the girls, "I think I should probably leave. I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable during what should be a celebration." Her words were gracious, but the hurt in her voice was unmistakable. She was still prepared to sacrifice her own comfort to avoid family conflict, even after years of growth and self-advocacy. "No," Marcus said, surprising everyone with the firmness in his voice. "You're not leaving, Lily. You belong here. This is your family, too." He turned to face Jonathan directly, his expression serious and determined. "Jonathan, we need to talk. Now." The two brothers stepped out onto Victoria's back patio, leaving the rest of us to manage the awkward aftermath of the confrontation. Through the sliding glass door, we could see their animated conversation, Marcus gesturing emphatically while Jonathan stood with his arms crossed defensively. When they returned 20 minutes later, both men looked emotionally drained. Jonathan's wife Sarah approached him immediately, whispering urgent questions about what had transpired. Their daughters had wandered back to Lily during their absence, and she was helping them experiment with their new art supplies. Jonathan stood in the doorway, watching his daughters interact with their aunt, his expression unreadable. Finally, he walked over to where Lily was sitting on the floor with the girls, surrounded by paper and crayons. "Lily," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I've been hiding behind Marcus and Victoria instead of thinking for myself about what's right and wrong. I'm sorry for the way I've treated you." It wasn't the most eloquent apology, but it felt genuine. Jonathan had never been as articulate as his siblings, preferring action to words in most situations. His willingness to speak up in front of his children and wife represented a significant step forward. The rest of the evening proceeded more smoothly, with Jonathan making obvious efforts to include Lily in conversations and activities. He asked about her work, complimented Emma on her cooking contributions to the dinner, and allowed his daughters to continue their art projects under their aunt's guidance. But the real transformation in Jonathan became apparent in the weeks following Christmas. Unlike Marcus, who had undergone a dramatic conversion through education and advocacy work, Jonathan's change was quieter and more practical. He began including Lily in family text message groups, sharing photos and updates about his daughter's activities. He asked Victoria for book recommendations about transgender experiences, approaching his education with the same methodical thoroughness he brought to his work as an electrician. Most significantly, he started bringing his daughters to my house for regular visits with their aunt and grandmother, creating opportunities for them to develop relationships with Lily and Emma without the pressure of larger family gatherings. Watching my granddaughters interact with Lily was a joy that I had been denied for 3 years. 8-year-old Sophie and her twin sister Grace accepted their aunt's identity with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often bring to adult complications. To them, Aunt Lily was simply the fun relative who taught them art techniques and listened to their stories about school with genuine interest. The transformation of my family didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't without setbacks and challenges. There were still moments of tension and misunderstanding, times when old patterns of behavior threatened to reassert themselves. Marcus occasionally struggled with using the right pronouns or understanding terminology related to transgender experiences. Victoria sometimes overcompensated for her past rejection by being overly solicitous of Lily's feelings. Jonathan remained somewhat awkward in his interactions, unsure how to bridge the gap between his past silence and his current attempts at acceptance. But what mattered was that they were all trying. They were all committed to learning and growing and rebuilding the relationships that had been shattered by fear and prejudice. The legal aspects of our family drama were resolved 6 months after Christmas. I revised my will once again, this time distributing my estate more equitably among all 4 of my children, while still maintaining special provisions for Lily's continued advocacy work and support for LGBTQ causes. But I also added specific language requiring my children to maintain respectful relationships with each other as a condition of their inheritance. Anyone who returned to patterns of rejection, exclusion, or cruelty toward their siblings would forfeit their portion of the estate. It was a safeguard against backsliding, a way to ensure that the hard-won peace in our family would be maintained even after I was no longer there to mediate conflicts. The most profound change in our family dynamic was the way we began to handle conflict and difference. Instead of allowing disagreements to fester and divide us, we developed new patterns of communication that prioritized honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect. When Marcus struggled with understanding aspects of Lily's experience, he asked questions instead of making assumptions. When Victoria felt overwhelmed by the pace of family changes, she communicated her needs instead of withdrawing emotionally. When Jonathan felt uncertain about how to support his transgender sister, he sought guidance instead of remaining silent. These were small shifts in behavior, but they created a foundation for healthier relationships based on genuine understanding rather than superficial harmony. The ripple effects of our family's transformation extended far beyond our immediate household. Marcus's advocacy work grew to include speaking engagements and board positions with LGBTQ organizations. Victoria became a vocal supporter of inclusive policies in her children's schools and her workplace. Jonathan quietly but consistently stood up for LGBTQ rights in his blue-collar work environment, challenging jokes and comments that he would have ignored in the past. Most importantly, our children and grandchildren were growing up with a different understanding of family, love, and acceptance than previous generations had experienced. They were learning that families can change and adapt, that love requires action and advocacy, and that standing up for vulnerable people is a moral imperative rather than a political choice. My granddaughter Sophie, now 9 years old, wrote a school report about her Aunt Lily's transition, explaining to her classmates that some people are born in the wrong body, and that families should support each other through difficult changes. Her matter-of-fact presentation helped educate other children about transgender experiences and normalize the idea of diverse family structures. Marcus Jr., now 15, became an advocate for LGBTQ students in his high school, drawing on his family's experience to challenge bullying and discrimination. When classmates made transphobic jokes or comments, he spoke up with the authority of someone who understood the real-world impact of such language. These young people were carrying forward the lessons of acceptance and inclusion that had emerged from our family's painful journey, creating a legacy that extended far beyond our own relationships. As I reflected on the 3 years that had passed since I first changed my will, I was struck by how completely our family had been transformed. The decision that had seemed so drastic and destructive at the time had ultimately saved us from a future of continued dysfunction and division. By refusing to reward rejection and cruelty, I had forced my children to confront their own values and behavior. By standing up for love and acceptance, I had demonstrated that some principles are worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost. But more than anything, I had learned that families are not fixed entities that must be preserved exactly as they are. Families are living systems that can grow and change and adapt to new circumstances. The family I had now was different from the one I had raised, but it was also stronger, more compassionate, and more authentically connected. Lily had found her place as the beloved daughter, sister, and aunt she had always been meant to be. Victoria had developed the courage to stand up for her convictions and challenge injustice. Marcus had learned that true leadership requires admitting mistakes and advocating for vulnerable people. Jonathan had discovered that love sometimes requires stepping out of comfortable silence to take a stand. And I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to refuse to enable their children's worst impulses, even when that refusal comes at tremendous personal cost. The inheritance I was leaving my children now included not just financial assets, but also the knowledge that they had the capacity to change, grow, and choose love over fear when it mattered most. They had learned that family loyalty means supporting each other through difficulty and difference, not abandoning each other when life gets complicated. On a warm spring evening, exactly 4 years after Lily's initial coming out, our entire family gathered in my backyard for Emma's birthday celebration. 4 generations were represented around my picnic table. From my newest great-grandchild sleeping peacefully in Victoria's arms, to my sister Margaret, now 78, and still offering wisdom and perspective on family dynamics. As I watched my family interact with genuine warmth and affection, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey we had traveled together. It had been painful and difficult, filled with mistakes and setbacks and moments when reconciliation seemed impossible. But we had made it through to the other side, and we were all better people for having faced our fears and prejudices head-on. We had learned that love is not passive acceptance of the status quo, but active commitment to supporting each other's authentic selves. The woman who had sat in that lawyer's office 4 years earlier, disinheriting 3 of her 4 children, had been driven by anger and disappointment. The woman I had become through this process was motivated by something much more powerful: the understanding that love requires courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to do what's right even when it's difficult. As the evening wound down and my family began to say their goodbyes, Lily approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mom," she said, embracing me tightly. "Thank you for never giving up on our family, even when the rest of us had given up on each other." I held my daughter close, breathing in the scent of her perfume and feeling the solidity of her presence in my arms. This was the child I had carried for 9 months and raised with infinite care, the person who had taught me that love means accepting people for who they are, not who we think they should be. I didn't save our family, sweetheart, I whispered in her ear. We all saved each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.